don't drink that coffee." The chief doctor slipped something into it. Came a quiet, desperate whisper from behind the surgeon as he raised the cup to his lips, about to take his first sip. A 27-year-old orderly named Alina, small and slender, her face etched with worry and her eyes wide with alarm, stood right at his shoulder. She clutched a tray as if it were her only shield against impending disaster. From the moment she spoke, her demeanor screamed that something was terribly wrong. She was trying to warn him of a looming danger. The surgeon, a 35-year-old man named Sergey Vasilyevich, immediately felt a chill rising in his chest, as if he'd suddenly found himself on the edge of a catastrophe. He knew Alina was a responsible young woman with a touch of irony in her character, but she was never prone to baseless panic. Something in her expression, more precisely, the sheer terror in her eyes, convinced him to take her words seriously, even if they sounded utterly unbelievable. The chief doctor, a man with an impeccable reputation, at least on the surface, slipping something into his coffee, it seemed like a wild fantasy. Yet, Sergey noticed Alina's lips trembling slightly, and it didn't feel like a prank. The morning in the hospital cafeteria unfolded as usual, bustling with activity. Doctors and nurses in white coats and green surgical scrubs moved about. Exhausted night shift workers hurriedly finished their coffee before heading home, while fresh arrivals, full of energy, discussed patients. The familiar hum of a busy workplace filled the air, but it all faded in an instant when Alina's words hit him. "What did you say?" Sergey asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady, masking any hint of panic as he slowly set the cup back on the table. "I saw it," she whispered, careful not to draw attention from others nearby. "Viktor Gennadievich, the chief doctor, came to your table and sprinkled something from a small packet. It looked like powder. Please don't drink it." Alina swallowed hard, nervously glancing around. At the far end of the cafeteria, nurses were animatedly discussing shift schedules. A few doctors stood by the coffee station, cups in hand, while others leisurely ate breakfast before their shifts, dragging chairs across the tiled floor. No one paid much attention to their conversation, which was for the best. If things were as bad as Alina suggested, making a scene was the last thing they needed. "Good Lord," Sergey exhaled softly, quickly weighing his options. He wasn't prone to paranoia, but years of working in a hospital had exposed him to plenty of internal politics and conflicts. Actual attempts on someone's life, though, that seemed far-fetched. Yet, who knew what people were capable of when money, power, or personal gain were at stake? Just recently, during a staff meeting, Sergey had asked uncomfortable questions about new surgical equipment contracts. Viktor Gennadievich, the chief doctor, had looked at him with clear displeasure. "Are you questioning the validity of my decisions or the competence of our procurement team?" he'd said in front of everyone. Sergey had noticed then that the chief's gaze was far from friendly. "I understand. Thank you for warning me," Sergey replied quietly, leaning slightly toward her, trying to hide his unease. In that moment, he made a snap decision, possibly a reckless one. He swapped his cup with another on the table, Alina's coffee, which, judging by her actions, was unsweetened since she'd been about to head to the sugar station. "Doctor," she gasped, seeing what he was doing. "I want to figure out what's in there," he said under his breath, fully aware of the risk. "If we're going to catch him, we need evidence, at least something to send for analysis." He carefully pulled the cup closer, but had no intention of drinking it. They needed to find a lab to test it anonymously, or at the very least, get it to a toxicology center. But it had to be done discreetly. "You're crazy," Alina muttered. "All right, fine. I'm with you." She understood she'd saved him from one sip, and now he was taking a bold step in return. The orderly realized they needed to check for traces of the powder at the bottom of the cup, or preserve the drink itself. At that moment, Viktor Gennadievich strode confidently back into the cafeteria. He noticed Sergey and Alina standing together, whispering. The chief doctor headed straight for them, trying to appear calm, but his eyes darted to Sergey's cup. "Sergey Vasilyevich," he said softly, "getting ready for breakfast or perhaps lunch after your shift. How was the night?" Sergey felt his stomach drop. Forcing a calm smile, he replied, "Just grabbing a coffee before surgery. You know we've had a tough patient today. I'm heading to the operating room in an hour." "Excellent." The chief doctor nodded, glancing at the table. "And Alina, the orderly, is helping you with something?" Alina wanted to say she was just delivering a tray, but could only manage a polite, "Yes, Viktor Gennadievich, everything's fine." Sergey noticed the chief's eyes lingering on the cup, as if trying to see if he'd taken a sip. A strange grimace of disappointment flashed across Viktor Gennadievich's face before it morphed into a friendly smile. "Well, I won't keep you," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Sergey Vasilyevich, stop by my office when you're free. There's a work matter to discuss." Sergey gave a short nod as the chief doctor walked away. Inside, his nerves were on edge. Alina, pale, stepped back toward the window, pretending to rearrange cups on her tray. "What do we do now?" she whispered, avoiding his gaze. "Should we take the cup to the lab techs before someone clears it away?" "Let's go." Sergey exhaled. "But we need to be quiet about it." They didn't bother continuing the breakfast charade. Sergey picked up the cup and carefully carried it toward the cafeteria exit, with Alina following, her eyes shielding the situation from curious colleagues. Unfortunately, just as they reached the door, a janitor blocked their path, mopping the floor. They had to pause, and in those fleeting moments, someone, perhaps on the chief's orders or by sheer coincidence, called Alina from the back of the cafeteria, asking for help. When she returned, Sergey stood empty-handed. "Where's the coffee?" she asked softly. "Damn it," he muttered. "I stepped out of the cafeteria and ran into the head of the surgical department. He started talking about a patient. I set the cup on the windowsill, planning to grab it in a minute, but when I turned back, it was gone. Probably taken to be washed, or some nurse thought it was abandoned." Alina clutched her head. "It's gone? Now we got nothing." Quietly, Sergey calmed her, glancing around. "All right, so we don't have evidence yet, but we need to stay sharp. He might try again, and I don't believe he'll just back off." Alina nodded shakily, trying to breathe deeply to calm herself. The thought that someone might have seriously tried to poison the doctor seemed insane, but she'd seen the chief's suspicious behavior with her own eyes. "Okay," she said. "Since we don't have the cup, we'll just have to be more careful. Maybe you can talk to someone you trust, get some advice." Sergey considered. Was there anyone among his colleagues who wouldn't be afraid to stand up to the chief doctor? Maybe the anesthesiologist he discussed non-suspicious matters with before, who'd hinted at financial irregularities? Or Natalia Yurievna, the principled ICU doctor? But revealing the secret outright was risky. He needed to be sure of people first. "We'll see," he replied. "About a surgery now, a patient with severe stomach issues. We'll think it over later." He glanced at his watch. "Gotta run." Alina nodded, understanding that Sergey's primary duty was to save lives. But fear gnawed at her. Soon, he was in the operating room, dressed in green scrubs, a cap, and a mask, preparing for a resection of a damaged stomach section. His team, several assistants, and an anesthesiologist was ready for the procedure. Sergey knew he had to push aside all distractions. The patient, a 50-year-old woman, could survive if the surgery went smoothly. "Ready," he said quietly to Andrei Semyonovich, the anesthesiologist and a longtime colleague, and to the assistants. They confirmed their readiness. Soft background music played in the operating room, helping maintain focus. Under Sergey's steady guidance, the surgery began. His precise scalpel movements, calm commands, and quick reactions to bleeding showcased his expertise. Colleagues noticed that, despite the stressful night and the cafeteria shock, he remained fully focused. For hours, Sergey immersed himself in the surgical world. Incisions, suturing vessels, carefully removing diseased tissue, and checking with clamps and swabs. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but the scrub nurse wiped it away, handing him sterile wipes as needed. The anesthesiologist monitored blood pressure, pulse, and oxygen levels. The entire team worked like a well-oiled machine to ensure the patient's survival. When the surgery ended and the patient's vitals stabilized, Sergey left the operating room, feeling both aching fatigue and relief at a job well done. He removed his mask, scrubbed his hands, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. Then it hit him. Just hours ago, he'd been one sip away from drinking a cup with unknown contents. In the hospital corridor, he ran into Alina, who was holding a stack of clean linens by a window. Seeing him, she hurried over. "How'd it go? Is the patient okay?" "She's stable. I hope she'll be fine," Sergey said, managing a smile despite the growing tension inside. "You holding up?" "No one's asked me anything yet," she sighed. "I've been running around the ward, cleaning, helping the duty nurse. But I feel like someone's watching me. I keep catching weird looks." Sergey ran a hand through his disheveled hair, freed from the surgical cap. "Maybe it's just your imagination. Or maybe someone's onto us. Without solid evidence, we need to be careful. Are you going to see the chief? He asked you to stop by, didn't he?" "Yeah, I'll have to," Sergey said. "I don't know what he wants to talk about. Maybe another lecture about staying out of financial matters. Or maybe he's checking if I drank that coffee." Alina lowered her head, thinking, "If you need me, I can wait outside his office in case you need backup." Sergey looked at her warmly. He'd known Alina only as the diligent new orderly who joined their department 6 months ago. Now, she stood before him as someone who'd risked herself to warn him of danger, a person worthy of respect and sympathy. "Thanks," he said softly, "but it's better if you don't linger near his office. He might have noticed our conversation in the cafeteria." "All right," she agreed, understanding that drawing attention could backfire. "But if you need me, I'll be nearby in the ward." Sergey nodded and headed to the chief doctor's office. On the way, he ran through scenarios in his head. What if the chief asked outright, "Why didn't you drink the coffee?" Or started making threats? He needed to stay calm and not show fear. At the reception, the usual secretary was on maternity leave, replaced by a young, inexperienced temp. She pointed to the door, saying Viktor Gennadievich was waiting. Sergey knocked lightly and entered. The chief sat behind a large desk cluttered with papers, looking friendly enough, even standing to greet him. "Sergey Vasilyevich, come in, have a seat," he said. "How'd the surgery go?" "Successfully," Sergey replied, keeping his tone even. "Wonderful, I'm glad," Viktor Gennadievich said, folding his hands on the desk and looking directly at Sergey. "I called you to discuss the procurement of new equipment for the surgical department. You wanted better tools, modern sutures. I'm finalizing a contract as we speak." Sergey tensed. This was the very issue that might have sparked everything. Overpriced contracts, shady suppliers, unknown companies. "Of course," he said carefully. "I just want to ensure the supplier is licensed and the prices aren't inflated. There are cheaper alternatives on the market." The chief leaned back in his chair. "Sergey Vasilyevich, you know that in our business, it's not always about price, but reliability. Let's just say I have my channels for procuring what we need. We shouldn't question the leadership's authority. Or do you doubt my competence?" Sergey felt a surge of anger and helplessness. He knew the chief's channels were likely schemes for personal profit, costing the hospital dearly. But accusing him without proof was a death sentence professionally. and the fact that this man might have tried to poison him suggested he'd stop at nothing. Of course, I respect your experience, Sergey sidestepped. As a doctor, I just want the best outcomes for patients. If we can save on procurement, why not use those funds to improve the department? Exactly, the chief said with a slight squint. By the way, how was your coffee? Did you get a chance to enjoy it? Sergey's heart raced. A red flag. He answered as casually as possible. Oh, it's been hectic today. I set the cup down, got caught up with patients, then surgery. Didn't even get a sip. Had to toss it. Viktor Gennadievich gave him an odd look. Really? Didn't have time? Sergey shrugged. Works like that sometimes. No time to eat either. The chief tilted his head slightly. Understand. No big deal. Next time, savor it. Oh, and please, keep our internal matters quiet. Not everything needs to be aired publicly, especially if we want to maintain a friendly atmosphere in the team. Sergey felt a veiled threat. Keep your mouth shut, or there'll be trouble. He nodded calmly, wished the chief a good day, and left, trying not to betray his panic. In the corridor, he paused to catch his breath. The chief had clearly been checking if he'd drunk the coffee and was displeased that he hadn't. His comment about keeping things quiet was a warning. Sergey glanced around the corridor. No one was near the office except a nurse stacking papers in a filing cabinet down the hall. I need to tell Alina, he thought, but he knew she was already on edge. Deciding not to rush, he returned to the doctor's lounge, where surgeons changed, rested briefly between operations, and handled paperwork. He sat at the desk, opened the surgical log, and tried to focus on routine entries, but his thoughts kept circling back to the chief and his possible motives. Outside, the corridor buzzed with footsteps, the rustle of linen carts, and the voices of patients' families. The hospital, like a living organism, hummed along its usual rhythm. But Sergey now saw danger in these walls. How could he keep working here if someone was capable of poisoning him? It might not have been poison, maybe a laxative or something to discredit him, but it was still nothing good. Suddenly, the lounge door cracked open. Alina peeked in, saw no one else was there, and quickly stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She held a bundle of gauze. Am I interrupting? She asked from the doorway. No. Come in, Sergey said, gesturing to a chair beside him. How's your day going? Busy, she sighed, wiping sweat from her forehead. I was cleaning the storage room and overheard one of the doctors, maybe a cardiologist, saying the chief's been acting strange, reminding everyone he's in charge. He hinted that some senior doctors might face trouble if they get too vocal. It freaked me out even more. Sergey frowned. So he's pressuring anyone who might challenge his shady decisions. By the way, I just saw him. He straight up asked if I drank the coffee. He wanted to make sure I got his gift. Alina pressed her lips together. God, that's terrifying. I don't even know what else he's capable of. Should we go to the regional authorities or the police? Without evidence, no one will believe us, Sergey said grimly. They'll say we're making it up. He's got enough connections to bury this. Plus, he's a respected figure with a long career, and the hospital is technically thriving. Alina bit her lower lip, glancing at the gauze bundle in her hands. By the way, I brought you something from the lab. It's not poison, don't worry. I just thought we could try figuring out what happened ourselves. I went to our small lab under the pretense of picking up gauze and gloves. I overheard the lab tech complaining about too many samples and how she'd help someone faster if she knew who to prioritize. I thought maybe she'd agree to test the coffee for foreign substances if we sneak her a sample. But the problem is the sample's gone. Sergey nodded, appreciating the idea. The coffee's probably been washed away by now. But if he tries to spike something again, maybe we can catch him red-handed. The thought of waiting for another poisoning attempt was chilling. They fell silent. Then Sergey decided they needed to take concrete steps. Alina, Do you trust any senior nurses or doctors enough to share what we've seen? We need at least one witness to back us up. I'm not sure, she said. A lot of people here depend on the chief. Some have mortgages, others are hoping for promotions, or they're just scared of losing their jobs. I doubt anyone would go against him. Sergey knew she was right, but staying alone was dangerous too. If something else happened, they'd need support. He decided to bide his time while subtly feeling out colleagues. Just then, the lounge door opened, and Yevgeny, a young surgeon who sometimes assisted Sergey, walked in. Seeing Alina, he smiled. "Oh, you're here. I was looking for you to help carry some boxes of gloves." They opened the storage downstairs, and no one's free to haul them up. Alina nodded, realizing her conversation with Sergey had to end. She didn't want to spill anything in front of Yevgeny, though his smile seemed genuinely friendly, with no hint of malice. Maybe he was a good guy. She'd never noticed him being close to the chief. But now wasn't the time to share secrets. Sergey and Alina exchanged a quick nod, and she left with Yevgeny. Sergey stayed in the lounge, pondering his next move. Soon, he was called to consult on a patient in another wing, and work demands pushed personal concerns aside. The rest of the day passed in a blur of rounds, consultations, and paperwork. By evening, Sergey was exhausted, but the real shock was yet to come. Around 8 p.m., as he prepared to head home, panic erupted in the corridor. Someone was shouting for help, calling for the on-duty doctor. Sergey rushed toward the noise. In the ER, a man in a white coat lay unconscious on the floor, surrounded by frantic nurses. Alina stood by his head, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. She stammered as Sergey approached. "It's our anesthesiologist, Andrei Semyonovich. He just collapsed." Sergey knelt beside him, quickly checking his pulse and breathing. "Get him to the ICU now. It looks critical. Someone call for a stretcher." As staff ran for a stretcher, Sergey asked Alina to fetch a blood pressure cuff and stethoscope to assess the situation. The anesthesiologist looked as if he might have had a heart attack, stroke, or poisoning. "Did he say anything before he passed out?" Sergey asked. "No," Alina whispered. "I only saw him stagger, grab the wall, and his face turned gray. I ran over, and he was already collapsing." They rushed Andrei Semyonovich to the ICU and hooked him up to monitors. Sergey and 2 ICU doctors began intensive care, with Alina assisting by fetching medications and supplies. His condition was dire: unstable blood pressure, weak pulse, labored breathing. Sergey's mind raced. Could he have drunk that coffee? But the cup was gone. Or had the chief spiked something else? Did Andrei have a conflict with the chief? Could this be poisoning? An ICU doctor asked quietly, noting the odd symptoms: sudden collapse, breathing issues, resembling anaphylactic shock, though Andrei had no known allergies. Maybe a toxin? Sergey nodded almost involuntarily. It's possible, but he couldn't say aloud who he suspected. They needed proof. For half an hour, they fought for Andrei's life. They stabilized him, but he remained in a deep coma with no clear prognosis. "Move him to a private room," Sergey ordered. "Monitor him around the clock. And please, take blood for a full toxicology screen." The ICU doctor nodded, his face showing clear concern. When the chaos subsided, Sergey and Alina stood outside the ICU, emotionally drained. "Sergey Vasilyevich, do you think this is connected?" Alina asked softly, glancing at the anesthesiologist through the glass partition. "I'm afraid so. Maybe he knew something or was about to speak out against the chief. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but there are too many coincidences." "What now?" Fear filled Alina's eyes. If it's really him, the chief, and he's doing things like this so easily, we're in serious danger. Sergey wanted to reassure her, but couldn't lie. He knew how grave the situation was. "We need to be extremely careful," he said. Let's wait for the tox results. If it's a rare poison, it's unlikely Andrei stumbled across it by accident. That would give us grounds for an investigation. Alina nodded, wiping tears. Sergey put an arm around her shoulders, trying to offer some comfort. They stood like that for a couple of minutes until footsteps echoed down the corridor. Viktor Gennadievich approached the ICU, his face tense. "What's going on here?" he asked sternly. "I heard the anesthesiologist is in critical condition." Sergey nodded curtly. Andrei Semyonovich suddenly lost consciousness. "We resuscitated him. He's critical." The chief frowned. "Do you think it's poisoning or something else?" Sergey chose his words carefully. "It's too early to say. Tests are being done, but the symptoms are concerning." For a moment, Viktor Gennadievich looked away. "All right, let's not stir up panic among staff or patients. Keep it quiet while the doctors figure it out." He raised an eyebrow, glanced at Alina, but said nothing to her. Then, turning to Sergey, he added, "You'll make sure everything's under control, right?" "Of course," Sergey replied shortly. The chief nodded and left, the glass ICU door closing behind him. Sergey and Alina exchanged a look. On one hand, Viktor Gennadievich seemed concerned. On the other, his request to avoid panic could mean keeping outsiders in the dark. "He's clearly trying to cover it up," Alina whispered. "Who'd believe this is a coincidence?" Sergey didn't know how to respond. It felt like a nightmare. Yesterday's spiked coffee, today's anesthesiologist with suspected poisoning, all against a backdrop of shady procurement deals and rising hospital tension. He maintained the appearance of doing his job, careful not to arouse the chief's suspicion. While ICU doctors tended to Andrei, Sergey and Alina decided to head home as their shifts ended. The evening sky outside the hospital had darkened, with only the on-call teams remaining in the corridors. They stepped outside, walking along the path by the entrance, shifting in the cool breeze. They didn't dwell on the weather. It was just a backdrop now. "I'll walk you," Sergey offered. "With everything going on, I don't want to leave you alone out here." Alina wanted to protest that her bus stop wasn't far, but the situation was too unsettling to refuse. She nodded, and they walked together, staying vigilant, scanning for anyone following. The people leaving the hospital seemed like regular staff, with no signs of surveillance. "Sergey Vasilyevich," Alina said as they waited at the bus stop, "I'm really scared. This man, the chief, could easily fire me. But worse, he might do something to me or you." Sergey looked at her worried face. She seemed so young, almost childlike despite her 27 years. He felt a wave of compassion and guilt. Should she even be involved in this? "Listen, Alina," he said softly, "I'll be here. We can't ignore what he's doing. If he's profiting criminally and willing to eliminate people, we need to find allies and proceed carefully." Alina exhaled gratefully. "Thank you. I'm glad you're here. And thank you for warning me. Who knows what would have happened otherwise," he said, recalling the fateful cup. Her bus arrived, and Alina boarded. Sergey stayed at the stop, catching a taxi to get home quickly. Inside, he felt tomorrow would bring an even riskier game. That night, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Images swirled in his mind. The chief's face, Andrei's glazed eyes, Alina's frightened gaze. He thought about his contacts in law enforcement. Not close, but maybe worth approaching. Going to them empty-handed was risky, though, and a snitch could tip off the chief. Morning came, and Sergey, barely having breakfast, headed to the hospital. He'd worked there for 10 years, starting right after his residency, never imagining he'd be investigating a potential murder or poisoning within these walls. Entering the lobby, he sensed a tense atmosphere. Staff moved about, visibly concerned. Whispers floated about Andrei having a stroke or heart attack, though few knew the true cause. In the ICU, Sergey found Andrei, still comatose, hooked to machines with unstable vitals. On duty was Natalia Yurievna, a seasoned ICU doctor in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor. "How is he?" Sergey asked, approaching her. "No change," she replied curtly. "We're waiting for the tox results. They said by tonight, but you know how delays happen." Sergey nodded, aware that someone higher up might have requested a delay. "Tell me," he asked suddenly, "did Andrei seem worried lately? Did he mention any issues?" Natalia Yurievna snorted. He wasn't happy with some of the chief's orders, especially about medication and equipment supplies. But he rarely spoke out openly. "I overheard him once in the corridor, grumbling that things couldn't go on like this, that someone was stealing money. I thought it was just typical frustration." Sergey sighed. It seemed Andrei had been digging into the chief's affairs, and those who dig often become targets. "Thanks, Natalia Yurievna," he said, checking on the patient before leaving. In the corridor, Alina rushed up to him, looking tense. "Sergey Vasilyevich, listen." She stopped, glancing around. "Let's go to the lounge." They entered the empty doctor's lounge, and Alina said quietly, "I overheard a lab tech saying Andrei's blood test showed a suspicious substance, possibly a neurotoxin, but its origin is unclear. The tech wanted to report it to toxicology, but someone told them to hold off." Sergey felt a chill. "So, it's definitely poison. This is getting serious. If it's a synthetic, rare toxin, we need to figure out how it got to Andrei." Alina whispered. "And where do we get proof it was the chief? We only saw him put something in your coffee, but we haven't proven it was poison. Andrei might have kept papers or files on the procurement scams," Sergey mused. "Maybe the chief wanted him gone because he was about to cause a stir." Sergey bit his lip, thinking, maybe we should check his belongings or ask his family. Alina frowned. "That feels like prying. But if we want to save him and ourselves, I don't know. We'll have to take the risk," Sergey decided. "I'll talk to the nurse who was on duty with Andrei. Maybe he left something in his locker or the anesthesiologist's lounge." Alina agreed. "I'll stay close and help if needed." Throughout the day, they discreetly gathered information. Sergey spoke to a few nurses, hinting that Andrei might have left important documents, but no one knew anything concrete. Toward evening, as staff began to leave, they seized a moment to slip into the anesthesiologist's break room, a small space with a locker, sofa, and table. "There's his locker," Alina said, pointing to a nameplate. "But it's probably locked." Sergey checked. It was secured with a combination lock. "How do we open it?" "We don't know the code." Alina looked around. "Maybe he wrote it somewhere, like on the inside." Sergey tried guessing, spinning the dial. Knowing people often use simple codes like 0000 or birthdays. After a few futile attempts, he heard a faint click. The lock opened. They exchanged glances. The code was simple. Andrei clearly hadn't expected to need protection from colleagues. Inside were medical journals, clean clothes, some personal medications, likely painkillers or vitamins, and a couple of folders. "Look," Alina whispered, handing Sergey a folder labeled contracts. They opened it and found photocopies of medical equipment contracts. The supplier names were unfamiliar, and the amounts were clearly inflated. Viktor Genadievich's signature was on every document. "Here it is," Sergey breathed. Andrei was collecting evidence of corruption. He must have been planning a big move, maybe a complaint to the Ministry of Health or law enforcement. Alina's hand shook. Now it's clear why they poisoned him, and why they try to poison you. You ask questions about the contracts, too. "We need to hide these," Sergey decided, "and get them to someone who can start an investigation. But we have to be careful. If the chief finds out we have them." He figured it wasn't the time to rush to the police. Late at night, no one would take him seriously. Plus, the chief likely had connections. They needed a trustworthy ally to avoid endangering themselves or Alina. They carefully locked the locker, ensuring the combination was reset, and slipped out of the room. The corridor was empty, lit only by dim emergency lights. Sergey clutched the folder to his chest. "We'll take it to my lounge and hide it in my cabinet. Tomorrow, I'll try to reach a retired investigator I know. He still has some contacts." Alina nodded, and they walked together, hearts pounding like cornered animals. It felt like a guard or one of the chief's people could be around any corner. But they reached the lounge and hid the documents without incident. "All set," Sergey said, closing the cabinet door. "It should be safe until morning. But stay sharp. Go home, and I'll stick around to check on today's surgical patient." "Okay," Alina agreed, relieved the folder wasn't at her place. If the chief ordered a search, she wouldn't be the target. "Don't stay too late." Sergey saw her to the hospital exit. She left, and he returned to the ward, made chart entries, and spoke with the night shift. When he finally left the hospital, it was nearly midnight. Catching a taxi, he glanced at the empty streets, half expecting the chief's silhouette lurking like a predator. But he got home safely. The next morning, still groggy, Sergey returned to the hospital. His plan was to find a moment to grab the documents and meet his retired investigator friend, Viktor Pavlovich. But at the ward entrance, Yevgeny, the young surgeon, met him, looking frantic. "Sergey Vasilyevich, we need you," he said urgently. "Emergency surgery, a perforated ulcer. We need you to assist." Sergey knew he couldn't delay. A life was at stake. He rushed to change, hoping no one had tampered with the lounge. Surgery couldn't wait. The operation lasted nearly 4 hours, demanding all of Sergey's focus. Thoughts of the hidden documents surfaced only occasionally. When it was over, he completed the postoperative notes, changed, and hurried to the lounge. No one was there. He opened the cabinet, heart pounding, and checked inside. The folder was still there. "Thank God," he muttered. "We can't wait." He packed the folder into a bag with a notebook of dates and some Andre had kept as personal records and left the lounge. He stopped to find Alina, who was on duty in another wing, cleaning and assisting in the dressing room. He spotted her mopping a corridor. "Have you already found a way to pass on the materials?" she asked quietly. "I'm about to. I trust my investigator friend. He might know how to keep the chief from covering his tracks." Alina noticed the bag in his hands, feeling a surge of worry. "Be careful. If the chief suspects you have those documents." Sergey nodded. "I'll try. You too. Make sure no one sees us talking about this." She picked up her mop, pretending to work. Sergey headed for the exit, adrenaline pumping. He knew this move could cost him his career, or worse. But there was no other way. Before he reached the doors, Viktor Gennadievich stepped out from around a corner. His cold gaze landed on the bag in Sergey's hands. "Sergey Vasilyevich, where are you off to during work hours?" he asked, his voice steady but with a steely edge. Sergey forced a smile. "Hello. I'm on a break, just running a personal errand." The chief stared into his eyes. "What's in the bag? Not patient charts, I hope." Sergey waved it off, tried to stay calm. "Just some personal papers." Viktor Gennadievich frowned, but didn't press further. "I'd like to discuss an order with you. Stop by my office when you're back." Sergey nodded, sidestepped the chief, and hurried out, heart racing. He caught a taxi to Viktor Pavlovich's address. On the way, he glanced back, half expecting to be followed, but the coast seemed clear. Viktor Pavlovich lived in a small house. Sergey knocked, and the 60-year-old retired investigator opened the door, his face kind but his eyes sharp. "Sergey, come in. Something urgent? You don't usually drop by during work hours." Sergey stepped inside, catching the scent of tea and pastries, but wasting no time on pleasantries. He recounted the situation, the suspicious procurements, Andrei's poisoning, the chief's apparent targeting of dissenters. Viktor Pavlovich listened, frowning, occasionally asking for details. "This smells like trouble," he grumbled. "You're poking a serious hornet's nest, or at least a very dangerous man. Show me the documents." Sergey handed over the folder. The investigator skimmed it, his eyes narrowing. Clear corruption. The chief's signatures, inflated prices, grounds for a major case. But if he has connections in local health authorities, they might bury it. We need to go higher or straight to law enforcement, though that has risks too. "What should I do?" Sergey asked, desperate. "First, we make 2 copies," Viktor Pavlovich said. "I'll keep one, and I'll pass the other to trusted contacts. If anything happens, the documents will surface." He led Sergey to a printer scanner. "I'll talk to an honest prosecutor I know in the regional office. But you, son, need to be careful. Cover your tracks." Sergey thought of Alina. "My first job is to protect her." "Good," the investigator said, scanning the documents. "Thanks for trusting me. I'll do what I can to stop this mess." As the copies were made, Viktor Pavlovich stored the originals and copies in separate folders. "Leave the originals with me. I'll stay in touch with the prosecutor. Take the copies, but keep them somewhere safe. If they search you, let them think you've got nothing." Sergey thanked him and left with the copies in a black plastic bag. Back at the hospital, it was lunchtime and the cafeteria was noisy. He slipped into the lounge without drawing attention, spotting Alina, who waved to talk later. But before they could meet, the chief appeared. "Sergey Vasilyevich, you want to talk?" Viktor Gennadievich said with forced warmth. "I asked you to stop by my office." Sergey knew he couldn't avoid it. "Yes, of course, I'm coming." His heart beat faster. The chief might suspect he'd left with the folder. They entered the office, and the chief closed the door, seating Sergey across from him. An empty coffee cup on the desk sparked an uneasy memory. "So," Viktor Gennadievich began, lacing his fingers, "we've got an audit from the Regional Health Board coming up. There's talk going around. I'd ask you to avoid unnecessary chatter about procurements or supply issues. Everything's under control." Sergey replied cautiously, "Of course I understand. But what about Andrei's case? Don't you think we should investigate where that toxin came from?" The chief's eyes flashed. "What do you mean?" "I've heard it's a cardiovascular issue. No confirmed poisoning. If there was, he could have ingested anything. Maybe even self-inflicted." Sergey shuddered inwardly. The chief was deflecting, blaming on an accident. "The lab techs," he started. "The lab techs won't confirm anything." Viktor Gennadievich cut him off, grimacing. "Look, doctor, stick to your job. I get that you're a good surgeon, but I'm the boss. If I catch anyone spreading rumors or slander about malicious acts in this hospital, there'll be consequences. You don't want trouble, do you?" Sergey realized this was a direct threat. His fists clenched under the table, but he forced calm. "Of course not. I'm just worried about a colleague." The chief nodded curtly and dismissed him with a gesture. As Sergey left, he noticed Viktor Gennadievich's cheek twitch, as if barely containing anger. Outside, Sergey exhaled in relief. By a window, he met Alina's gaze. She glanced around warily, and they pretended to head to the elevator together. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "He threatened me," Sergey replied. "Told me to keep quiet." Alina frowned. "We need to act fast, or he'll try to destroy us." Sergey nodded. "I've done something. The originals are safe. I've got copies. Now we wait for my contact to involve the regional prosecutor." They fell silent as a colleague passed by. Then Alina suggested, "I heard there's a meeting with regional inspectors this afternoon. Maybe we could eavesdrop, see if we learn anything useful." Sergey hesitated. "Risky, but try it. I'm stuck with post-op dressings. If you do it, don't get caught." Alina agreed, and they parted ways. Sergey went to his patients, while Alina reached the conference room where the chief was meeting with health officials. As an orderly, she wasn't invited, but she found a side door to an adjacent storage room used for stacking chairs. Through a crack, she could catch snippets of conversation. Viktor Genadievich's voice was loud and confident, boasting about the hospital's achievements, reduced wait times, and upcoming modern equipment, without mentioning the inflated prices. The officials asked polite questions. How's the funding for procurements this year? Is everything transparent? A female official asked. Completely transparent, the chief replied. Our accounting is meticulous, and we have all the acceptance records. No issues. What about the recent incident with the anesthesiologist? Another official asked. We heard he's in critical condition. It's an internal matter, the chief said. I found out he had a serious heart condition he kept hidden. It flared up. He's in the ICU, and our doctors are doing their best. Alina clenched her fists. He was lying. They knew it wasn't his heart but poison, or at least the chief did. She couldn't burst in and tell the truth. She'd be thrown out. The officials didn't press further, reviewing some documents before concluding, if everything's in order, we're satisfied. The meeting ended, and Alina nearly jumped when someone opened the storage room door from the other side. She ducked behind a rack in time. When she emerged, the officials were leaving with the chief, who smiled and shook their hands jovially. Alina knew the audit had uncovered nothing. Everything was covered up. The rest of the day was tense. Sergey and Alina exchanged glances but couldn't talk freely. The chief roamed the ward, inspecting everyone as if asserting control. Toward evening, Sergey slipped into the lounge to call Viktor Pavlovich. The investigator said he'd arranged a meeting with a trustworthy prosecutor, but it would take a few days to compile evidence and file an official complaint. Sergey knew those days could be dangerous. That night, Alina was on duty, and Sergey decided to stay at the hospital for safety. He asked Yevgeny to cover for him, saying he'd crash in the lounge. Yevgeny didn't ask questions. The hospital was dim at night. Alina went about her tasks, cleaning corridors, checking procedure rooms, helping when called. Sergey, in casual clothes, sat in the lounge sipping tea from a thermos, wary of hospital coffee. Around midnight, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Peeking through the cracked door, Sergey saw an unfamiliar man in dark civilian clothes. Not a doctor, patient, or uniformed guard. He carried a folder under his arm, glancing around as if searching for an office. Something's off, Sergey thought, easing the door shut and watching through the gap. The man approached a wall cabinet, trying to open it but finding it locked. He cursed under his breath and pulled out a set of lockpicks. Sergey froze. Were they already hunting for the documents? Just then, Alina appeared with a bucket and rag. The man, spotting her, hid the lockpick and pretended to look for the restroom. Can I help you? Alina asked warily. I'm looking for the restroom, he mumbled. They said it's around here. It's on the floor below, Alina replied coolly. Down the stairs, you'll see the sign. The man nodded and hurried off. Alina frowned, watching him go. When he disappeared, she set down her bucket and slipped into the lounge, where Sergey let her in, locking the door. Did you see that? She whispered. Yeah, some guy. I think he was looking for our documents. My God, the chief sent someone in the middle of the night to avoid attention, Alina said. Looks like it, Sergey said, running a hand through his hair to calm his nerves. We don't keep anything but standard medical tools in those cabinets. Good thing he didn't get to my stuff. I've already moved the folder. Alina sighed in relief. That's something. But it's terrifying to think what'll happen if he finds out you have copies. They knew the situation was escalating. The chief was getting aggressive, and his next move was unpredictable. We should avoid being alone, Sergey said. If something happens, we need a witness. The corridor lights dimmed, likely due to nighttime energy saving or a glitch. Wandering dark, empty halls felt unsafe. Keep doing your work calmly, Sergey said. I'll stay here overnight. In the morning, we'll stick together for the shift change. Alina nodded, grabbed her bucket, and left. As she walked away, she glanced back, her eyes a mix of fear, exhaustion, and gratitude. Sergey nodded. Hang in there. The night passed quietly. The man in dark clothes didn't return, or he was lying low. Morning brought the hospital back to life with new shifts. Sunlight streamed through the corridors, casting stripes on the linoleum. Sergey checked on Andre in the ICU. Still comatose, no improvement. If he doesn't recover, we won't get his direct testimony, Sergey thought. But maybe other staff statements and the documents would suffice. In a lobby, he noticed a crowd of staff, faces anxious, talking animatedly. In the center stood Viktor Gennadievich, announcing loudly, "Please, everyone, stay calm. The hospital will undergo an external audit from the prosecutor's office. It's standard procedure due to some patient complaints. Don't worry, everything will be fine unless someone stirs trouble with baseless rumors." Sergey's stomach tightened. The prosecutor's office was here, likely thanks to Viktor Pavlovich. But if the chief was warned, he could cover his tracks. Alina, among the nurses, caught Sergey's eye and nodded slightly. They both knew the real fight was starting. The day was tense. Plainclothes investigators accompanied by the chief asked staff questions and reviewed HR files. Sergey stayed low, but they called him in. A middle-aged man, identifying himself as a prosecutor, said, "Sergey Vasilyevich, we need details about your department's procurements. Are you aware of what tools were purchased?" Sergey's adrenaline surged. The chief stood nearby, arms crossed, watching closely. If Sergey spilled everything now, the chief might retaliate before the investigation concluded. But silence could let the case fizzle out. He chose caution. "I only know the basics. The administration handles finances. I'm just a doctor, but I've heard we got new sutures and equipment." The prosecutor nodded. "Can you name a supplier?" "I wasn't told specific company names," Sergey said. "That's a question for the chief." Viktor Gennadievich smirked, as if pleased Sergey wasn't exposing him. But the prosecutor pressed. "Do you think the prices might have been inflated?" The chief interjected. He said he doesn't deal with finances. "Those questions are for me or my deputies. You're mixing up the doctor with the accounting department." The prosecutor jotted something down, thanked Sergey, and moved on to other staff. Sergey left, realizing a formal audit might miss the core issue without stronger evidence or a direct accusation, which would expose them. The chief whispered to him, "See, it's all simple. Don't worry, audits are routine." Lowering his voice, he added, "I hope you won't ruin our reputation with rumors." Sergey understood it was another warning. He nodded, though he was seething inside. Not yet, he thought. The next day, the audit formally ended. The prosecutors left, promising to review documents further. The hospital resumed normal operations, but Sergey and Alina knew their contact would soon escalate to higher authorities. The chief, sensing trouble, called a meeting of senior doctors, threatening layoffs and disciplinary checks in a harsh tone. "Those who go against leadership will be out of a job fast," he said. Staff whispered fearfully in the corridors. Sergey and Alina noticed the man in dark clothes, supposedly a private security guard hired by the hospital, watching them. He was likely the chief's eyes. They stayed cautious. Days later, as Sergey prepared to leave, Viktor Pavlovich called. "It's set," he said curtly. "Tomorrow morning, people from the capital's office will arrive. Not like the local auditors. Stick with the orderly girl. It could get messy." Sergey thanked him and told Alina the next day was critical. She was pale but resolute. "If I need to testify, I'm ready." The next morning, a group in suits arrived with law enforcement. The chief, seeing them, paled but forced a smile. "Hello, how can I help?" They immediately began reviewing documents in accounting and questioning staff. Sergey and Alina stayed alert, ready to speak if called. By noon, the hospital was abuzz with rumors that the chief was cornered, locked in his office with investigators under a gag order. Sergey retrieved the contract copies from Viktor Pavlovich via courier, keeping them in his bag, ready to present if needed. Alina, pretending to clean, waited for a signal. A woman in her 40s with a sharp haircut and a crisp blazer approached, flashing a badge. "I'm Irina Vladimirovna from the capital's Economic Crimes Unit. You're Sergey Vasilyevich and Alina." She named Alina's last name. "We need to talk." They nodded, nerves mixing with relief, and asked for a private spot. Irina led them to a small and used office and closed the door. "I know you have evidence of the chief's corrupt schemes and information about the anesthesiologist's possible poisoning. Tell me everything." Sergey spoke, producing the papers, explaining how he found them in Andrei's locker, how Andrei was comatose after a strange collapse, and how the chief had spiked his coffee, with Alina saving him. Alina confirmed, adding she saw the suspicious packet. Irina listened, taking notes, asking clarify questions. "Thank you," she said. "You've been very helpful. We've seized documents from accounting showing clear discrepancies. Your information and these copies strengthen our case. As for the poisoning, we found a neurotoxin-like substance in Andrei's blood. That's attempted murder. We'll question the chief under oath." Alina exhaled. "So you can really get him?" Irina nodded. "We have enough to open a criminal case, but be warned, he may resist, cover tracks, or pressure you. Stay cautious." They thanked her. Leaving the office, Sergey and Alina felt a weight lift. Finally, serious authorities were involved. But that afternoon, something unexpected happened. An announcement over the intercom summoned all doctors and mid-level staff to the conference room. People filed in, whispering. Viktor Gennadievich appeared, face tense, flanked by unfamiliar men in civilian clothes. "Dear colleagues," he began, scanning the room, "we've had an unfortunate incident. The prosecutor's office received claims that some staff are accusing me of crimes, corruption, even attempted murder. This is complete slander. I'll do everything to find and punish those spreading these lies. Our team has always been united, and such slanderers must be ousted." The room buzzed. Some looked down, others exchanged glances, realizing Sergey, Andrei, and anyone involved were likely targets. Furthermore, the chief continued, "I've signed orders to terminate certain employees suspected of gross ethical violations." Alina glanced at Sergey in horror, standing near the wall. Was he about to name them? "Here," the chief said, "Orderly Alina," he gave her last name, "has been caught repeatedly violating work discipline, skipping duties, and causing discord. She is fired effective today. The order is signed." The crowd gasped. Alina froze, her knees trembling. Sergey wanted to step to her, but the chief went on. "Others face disciplinary measures. I hope this is resolved soon, and our team will be rid of bad actors." As people dispersed, murmurs filled the air. Alina stood pale, hands pressed to her chest, eyes welling. "They fired me," she whispered. Sergey put an arm around her. "Stay calm. This is illegal. He fired you without cause, probably to intimidate us. You don't have a permanent contract, but since the case is with the prosecutor, this looks like witness tampering. We'll fight it." Irina Vladimirovna approached. "I heard he fired the girl. Don't worry, it's a sham. We're documenting everything. Once the criminal case is opened, this will be seen as obstructing justice." Alina felt some relief, but tears still came. It hurt to be thrown out for telling the truth when she'd come to help people. The day dragged painfully. The chief strode through the hospital, issuing orders, asserting dominance. But by evening, police arrived with a search warrant for his office and accounting. Sergey and Alina sat in the lounge as excited voices and the secretary's shouts echoed from the corridor. Half an hour later, the lounge door burst open. A hospital guard and a stranger ordered, "Sergey Vasilyevich, come with us to the chief's office." Alina was summoned too. In the office, several police officers flipped through documents. Irina Vladimirovna was there, and the chief sat at his desk, red-faced with rage, but trying to stay composed. Seeing Sergey and Alina, he hissed, "Here are the slanderers. I hope you'll check them too." Irina motioned them closer. They approached, trembling inside but holding steady. "We found documents confirming corruption," she said. "We also have witness statements that the chief tried to intimidate staff into silence." The chief jumped up. "That's a lie. This is a political hit job. They set me up." Irina gave him a cold look. "We have enough evidence, Viktor Gennadievich. You're detained pending investigation." She nodded to the police. "Search his personal belongings." The chief protested, but an officer showed him the warrant. He shouted, "You have no right. I'm a distinguished doctor. They framed me." But the police found a small plastic packet of white powder in his desk drawer. "What's this?" Irina asked, holding it up in a gloved hand. The chief paled. "No idea. You planted it." Sergey and Alina exchanged glances, likely the same poison or something similar. Everything fell into place. The police, ordering the chief to be quiet, continued the search, finding more documents, then let him out in handcuffs. He looked ready to lunge at Sergey and Alina, but was restrained. "You'll pay for this," he yelled, glaring back. "You'll regret starting this." No one heeded his threats. As he was escorted down the corridor, staff parted, some gasping, others watching with quiet relief, perhaps realizing the tyrant who'd go to extremes was gone. Irina turned to Sergey and Alina. "We'll proceed with the criminal case and investigations. You'll likely need to testify as witnesses. Are you willing to cooperate?" "Yes," Sergey nodded, still in disbelief. "Of course," Alina added quietly, wiping tears of relief or shock. "Don't worry about the firing," Irina said. "It'll be voided since it was done under pressure." Alina nodded gratefully. Sergey hugged her shoulders, feeling the days-long tension ease. They'd done it. Of course, it wasn't over instantly. Ahead lay formalities, trials, and exposing schemes involving massive sums. The chief was linked to fake companies, taking kickbacks. When staff like Andrei and Sergey questioned it, he resorted to eliminating threats. Fortunately, thanks to Alina's bravery and lucky circumstances, murder was avoided. Andrei, after weeks in a coma, began recovering. When he could speak, he gave investigators crucial testimony, backed by Sergey and Alina, confirming the corruption. Alina was reinstated as an orderly with a permanent contract, recognizing her dedication. The hospital, under an interim, more honest director, began to heal, awaiting a new chief after the trials. Sergey remained a leading surgeon, his reputation bolstered. Colleagues respected his courage, recalling how he dared to raise procurement issues, later realizing the risks he'd faced. He and Alina grew close through their ordeal. Late-night talks in empty corridors, mutual support, shared danger fostering warmth. Initially cautious about a workplace romance, they eventually stopped hiding it. Colleagues were supportive. After all, when someone saves your life, it's natural to stay close. Months later, the court sentenced Viktor Gennadievich to prison for embezzlement and attempted murder. The powder in his desk and coffee matched the toxin in Andrei's blood. Forged documents he tried to destroy were preserved, and witness testimonies and expert reports were undeniable. The hospital entered a period of renewal. New leadership vowed to end shady schemes, improving staff conditions. Patients, initially wary after the scandal, saw the surgical department maintaining, if not surpassing, its high standards and relaxed. Sergey continued operating, consulting, and researching. Alina, inspired, began studying part-time to become a nurse, wanting to help more skillfully. Sergey supported her. "You're capable. You'll do great." In rare, quiet evenings, they reflected on that terrifying morning when Alina whispered, "Doctor, don't drink that coffee." The chief slipped something in. Who could have imagined those words would spark events changing many lives? Alina admitted she'd acted on impulse, unable to let a good person suffer. Sergey said he'd never forget how she saved him. The ordeal bonded them in something vital: compassion, care for others, valuing truth and justice. The healthcare system still had issues, and no one could predict if another corrupt chief might emerge. But the hospital staff learned silence wasn't an option when facing injustice. One timely voice, "Don't drink that coffee," saved not just a life, but an institution from corrupt schemes. So ended the story of the poison cup, corruption, and the courage of those who dared say no. No mysticism, just human greed and power driving crime, and bravery and conscience stopping it. Coffee machines hissed again in the cafeteria, their aroma comforting tired doctors. Sergey and Alina never took a cup without checking, but they trusted no one would dare such villainy again. They drank with relief, the main danger gone, the memory a reminder to always stand for truth, no matter how scary or risky. When the patient Sergey operated on that day returned for a follow-up, she asked, "Doctor, what happened? I heard there was trouble here." He smiled evasively. "Just some management hiccups. We sorted it out. How's your health?" She grinned gratefully. "All good. Thank you for saving me." Sergey thought perhaps this job, saving lives in and out of the operating room, was among the most vital. Once, Alina found an old spoon in a cabinet, the one the chief used to stir coffee, and felt odd relief. Just a spoon, but it could have symbolized so much trouble if I hadn't warned you. She carried a spark of confidence. Speak truth when you see wrong, no matter the fear or risk, or the world would slide into corruption and cruelty. Each morning, arriving for her shift, Alina looked at her colleagues and felt a bit closer, warmer. The hospital, shaken but stronger, showed people could change, and they did. Sergey and Alina became more than colleagues, trusting each other completely. No one was surprised when, a year later, they announced their engagement. That, though, is another story, not directly tied to the coffee cup, but deeply linked to how dark events can lead to bright outcomes. Had it not been for that fateful moment, who knows if they'd have bonded so deeply. As for the chief, his fate was sealed by law. He claimed it was a setup, a conspiracy, but the evidence and witnesses were irrefutable. No one expected a man of his stature to commit such crimes, but greed and fear of exposure can break even those in pristine white coats. One worn cup of coffee saved not just a surgeon's life, but exposed schemes costing the hospital and patients dearly. One small act, one call to conscience, and justice prevailed. Not instantly, not without risk, but in the end, good triumphed over evil in the hospital's halls. Today, staff whisper the legend of the orderly who bravely protected a doctor, who in turn became her closest ally. And whenever new coffee arrives in the cafeteria, someone jokes, "No one slipped anything in, right?" Laughter follows, half bitter from memory, but then they sip and say, "Now we're okay because honest colleagues are here, ready to stop evil in its tracks." Thank you for listening to the story until the end. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It motivates us to keep working on new stories every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to appear on your screen. We're very grateful to have you with us. See you soon.